All right, Kurt, and that's why it's possible Donald Trump is the Antichrist. As crazy as it may sound. Hey, everybody, you're listening to the Holy Rewind. As always, I'm the Charismatic.
And I am a cessationist.
Curtis, how are we starting today? You said something about aliens.
Yeah, I'm always up for talking about aliens or the perception of aliens. Extraterrestrial aliens.
not the illegal kind.
Illegal versus legal versus
Gotcha.
Not human aliens.
Good. we really don't want to be canceled. So when it comes to aliens, Kurt, and we do a slight little deep dive on this, you and I have talked about it before. With Donald Trump saying that he's going to release the UFO files, what potentially do you see as the harm if we find out that true aliens do exist?
I think it would depend on the person, but I think there would be a non-insignificant number of people who would really freak out over that. Of course, there'd be a small minority who were super excited. There would probably be a small minority who just didn't care. But I would say the majority of people, and I don't know how that majority would split, but some of them would, I think that might cause them to question their faith.
There's no doubt. I think if we find out that aliens, like sci-fi aliens, do exist, I think we lose 25% of the church overnight.
I wouldn't be surprised if it weren't even a little bit more than that.
It could be.
And I think that is dependent on the type of alien that is discovered. If it's humanoid and is in some way reminds us of ourselves, I think that would be a problem. If it were, insectoid or reptilian or something that it was like, okay, well, that's just a maybe sentient type of something I'm already familiar with, maybe larger in size, whatever. But I think the closer that it is to human, the more impactful it would be.
Now, why? So you and I agree on that. If you find out tomorrow that sentient aliens that look similar to us, that are able to communicate, that have families of sorts, that function in their own society, what does that do to you and your faith?
Almost nothing, oddly enough. Just because I'm positive there are lots of things in the universe that exist that God decided we didn't need to be privy to, and I'm fine with that. I have no idea what's taking place on the surface of a planet, even if it were inhabitable by humans by chance. On the other side of the galaxy or in another galaxy. I have no idea what's going on there. And if I needed to know, I probably would have been told. If it were pertinent in some way, I'm assuming that it would have been delivered to us via the Bible.
Yeah, so I agree with you, but I almost feel like it's easier for a charismatic to have that position than a cessationist, because you guys already don't believe in so much. There's already such a lack there of the supernatural, of the unseen realm, as our buddy Michael Heiser would put it.
I'm not sure I would characterize it as not believing it. I would prefer to think of it as requiring evidence. I myself, and I would assume most other cessationists, are not blind faith people. I'm willing.
I would say most cessationists aren't faith people. just to be completely honest with you.
And that would depend on by your definition of faith.
By my definition,
Maybe.
Or by what the Bible says, faith come by hearing, hearing by the word of God.
Okay, I would agree with that.
Yeah, well, I don't think a lot of your buddies would.
No, I bet they would.
So aliens, if they exist, I'm with you. Me personally, as far as my relationship with Christ, nothing changes. I may have more questions,
a lot more questions.
As if what is their role to play?
Why were we even tangentially not made aware of their existence, I mean, it would open up a whole host of questions for me, but it wouldn't test my faith at all, I don't think.
No.
Of course, it's difficult. It's difficult to say what will test your faith until you actually experience it, but I would tend to think that would have very minimal, if any, effect on my faith.
Yeah. Now, a little askew from aliens, we know that there are people who believe in reptilians,
Sure,
people who are infiltrating the government. We know that thought, that zeitgeist is out there. Do you put any thought? So let's do this. Let me rephrase the question. Give me your percentage, 1 to 100 if aliens exist, and then 1 to 100 if reptilians exist and are masquerading as people in the government.
Aliens themselves, based on the fact of how we have been looking and have yet to find anything that is substantial. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who are saying, well, there's mountains of evidence. Well, that's not substantial evidence. It's all inference and innuendo. So I'm talking like if you can bring one in the room and I can sit down and have a conversation with him, that is substantial evidence that someone saw something one time somewhere.
But that's still just substantial evidence for you, right?
Correct. Oh, yeah.
So these people who have had these quote unquote encounters,
yes,
that's substantial for them,
without a doubt.
Okay.
Yeah. But I guess my position is I would request the same thing that they got. I want to experience
to be probed. Okay.
Well, minus the probing, but I would want an experience that I couldn't talk away, that I couldn't think away, that I couldn't logically rationalize myself out of.
See, and what you're saying sounds so much what we experience as a charismatic. so you're there. You just need to experience those things, and then you'll be on our side, Kurt. That's great. So percentages, aliens.
If I have to pick a whole number, one,
I'm going to go 50%. I think it's more than possible. I even think it's probably likely. I find it odd that God would create the entire universe, but the only place that has any action happening is here on Earth.
It's not like it was more work, right?
You sure? Well, no, but
I mean, if you does
he do anything that's unnecessary though?
No, but he does
okay.
Lots of things that would be an indication of his glory, and even within our time span, something that we can't see the edges of and we can never fully grasp. That's glory. I've created something that's so large in your cycle, your lifespan on Earth as a species, not just as an individual. You will never see the end of it because it's that big. That's glory. Does it need to be that big? Of course not. It needs to be like what was that? The Truman Show, where where Jim Carrey was like he didn't need however far he needed to go. They just put that in a warehouse,
right?
So there's zero reason for the universe to be that big, other than the fact that it brings God glory.
Sure, and there's obviously no arguing that point. That's very possible. What about reptilians?
Zero.
Okay.
Well, no, I'll put them in one. I'll let them.
So you think reptilians are just as likely as aliens?
I would say that any sentient life form that is not terrestrial in nature is very, very low percentage.
Wow. I would go much lower on reptilians just because I know the people that believe in reptilians, they're a different breed from people who just believe in aliens.
That's true, but that's just a human tendency that once you believe something, you build a lore around it, right? I mean, the same thing happens with the Bigfoot sphere, the Loch Ness monster sphere, all the cryptozoology type creatures. One person sees something that they think they saw that might be this, and then an entire lore over time. An entire lore develops around it.
Yeah.
So I don't find it strange that some people can name the planets that they come from and the different types of races of these beings, and maybe even their different models of ships. And I mean, none of that surprises me. In the absence of good information, people will tend to create information.
I think we had a technological boom in the 60s to now that was either spirit taught or extraterrestrial taught.
Or human ingenuity.
Nope, absolutely not.
Okay.
You've been around enough humans. You know what we're capable of and what we're not capable of.
But there are also occasionally some very brilliant ones.
Yeah, usually whenever they're under drugs.
Or alien control.
Or alien control, absolutely.
Yeah. Or demon possession.
Or demonic, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
So it's sort of like the, what was the Greek god that delivered blacksmithing to humanity?
Gosh.
And got in trouble for that because it was a technology they weren't supposed to be able to work with iron.
I usually stick to the Bible, not mythology, so I'm a little fuzzy whenever it comes to that, Kurt.
Other than aliens,
I mean, aliens aren't mythology, so
they're not real.
You're not aware of them.
You're not aware of a god of blacksmithing either.
That's true. That's true. If you want to think that there are other gods out there, hopefully not capital G, but
no, it definitely would be a small G.
Okay.
With a forge making swords.
I mean, if we're talking about small G gods, I'd probably be more apt to hear what you're saying. What about all those aliens that started self-deleting themselves or dying in funky ways?
The scientists.
Yeah, that we're going to...
Some of whom did investigate UFOs or whatever. I don't know what to make of that. I'm sure there are lots of really strange patterns that exist in the world if a person were to look for them. I don't know if this is just, I mean, if you look at it on a global scale, it's still a near infinitesimal number of strange things that happen. I bet if you were to worldwide, if you were to not narrow it down to any specific field of study, you would probably find way more than 11 people who disappear across the planet under questionable circumstances. And then once you have that list of people, you would be pretty easy to start drawing similarities or common things between them. So I don't know. It may be something. Of course, the best thing, of course, is government conspiracy or aliens are taking them, or some other country is taking them so that they can catch up technologically. There's all kinds of theories, but I'm not sure that 11 people who happen to share a field disappearing in a certain amount of time is...
I think that one guy that was literally on TV saying that he is a happy man, he is a happy individual, he has no interest in hurting himself, winds up committing suicide.
That was a little sketch.
A little sketch, Kurt. Come on.
It's suspicious.
If there was a court case and I was able to show that will be damning evidence in saying he did not do what they're saying he did. I mean, it's just like Epstein. Epstein didn't kill himself. We all know this. We all know this.
Probably not. That was probably some sort of someone caused that to happen.
Way to go, Kash Patel. Anyway, before we drop any other big names, let's get into the main discussion today, Kurt. We're talking about grief and how do we as Christians deal with grief. We recently lost somebody in my family, somebody that. It was my grandmother-in-law. It was my wife's grandmother, who honestly was more of a mother figure than anything to her.
Sure.
And she is handling it so much better than I ever would have imagined. But I want to know, as a believer, as a Christian, what is our response to grief? Biblically speaking, how should we handle it? And thirdly, why don't you like going to funerals? Which we might start with the third one just to ease into it.
I was going to say I'd be happy to try to answer the third one first, and then we can get into specifics of what my interpretation of the believer's grief is from the Bible. I don't not go. I do go to some. I'm just of the opinion that it's funerals, specifically the funeral itself. I've just always felt that there should be a significant relationship there. I hear people saying, well, I'm going to the funeral of, my best friend growing up's cousin's nephew, or just some very far removed. I'm like, oh, well, so you were close to the person. Well, no, I hadn't talked to him since we were 10. I'm like, well, okay. And if you want to go, I'm not being critical. I think choosing or choosing not to attend is extremely subjective and personal decision. So I definitely want to start with that. There's nothing wrong with going, but I also don't think that there's nothing wrong with now if the relationship doesn't have to be with the deceased, it could be with someone who is close to the deceased. So I'm not saying you have to have been best friends with the deceased in order to attend. You could be best friends with you could be good friends with a relative or a good close friend. But at that point, you're not there for the deceased. You're there for the person who you do have a relationship with,
right? To
support them. Obviously, the deceased doesn't require any support.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. Couldn't the argument be made? You're not there for the deceased anyway. You're there for the ones who are left behind.
True, and that's why I think it's very. I think it should be more relational than how we practice it. And I don't know if this is just a thing here in the States or if this is. That's actually something interesting I may kind of look into now after this, just because I'm curious. Is the death rituals of other cultures? I'm guessing they're significantly different than ours, and I would argue that again, not saying someone shouldn't go or not saying someone should go. I just think that for me personally, it doesn't feel right unless I have a significant relationship somewhere in there. For the same reason that I wouldn't just, if I lived near the funeral home, I wouldn't just go to random funerals.
Sure. And I don't even necessarily disagree with you. So whenever you came for my wife's grandmother, mm-hmm. there were a lot of people who were surprised that mm-hmm. you were there. And that's the part I think that surprises me.
Yeah.
Because, so even though you didn't have a relationship with her, you obviously do, me and my wife.
Never met her.
Mm-hmm. Never met her. But she was a believer.
Sure.
So we've got that connection.
Right.
I don't have a problem because personally, I don't like funerals.
Oh, I think they're awful. And especially the way that we do them is borderline strange.
Is it? I truly don't know. I haven't studied enough to see how other cultures, other societies do, right. other than catching the deceased on fire and just letting him burn for a while. I know when my grandmother passed away, we just had a celebration of life service. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was much more encouraging and uplifting than the normal.
Right. And I think that is a step in the right direction, but it has to actually be that, not just a change of terms, which seems to be the popular thing right now. The big thing culturally seems to be just to change definitions of words or rename things, as if that somehow makes the intent of what the representation of the words is now different because I've changed the words, when actually the intent or the spirit of the words is exactly the same. And I would say that same thing happens with, it went from funerals and wakes and all these other things, and now it's become celebrations of life, which is good if it actually is that. If it's still just what I would consider a normal, traditional funeral, but called a celebration of life, then you haven't changed anything except the wording in the book or on the sign or whatever.
Yeah.
Which there's almost zero value in just changing words, in my opinion.
I agree. You have to start somewhere, though, right? So maybe changing the word it's certainly probably the first step in the right direction. But I'm with you. If you're calling it a celebration of life, but everybody's crying, boo-hooing, nobody's celebrating anything,
that
you're just sad and
like
depressed.
A celebration.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
That's why I said as long as it is that, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if it's changed in name only, what have you done?
Right. No, I agree with you. I just don't know if I showed up to a funeral that somebody would say, "Oh wow, Corey usually doesn't do this." I think that's the interesting moniker that we have to put on that people were surprised that you were there.
Yeah, because it's generally not something that and again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with either way, but there are some people who go to every funeral that they are even just aware of, regardless of any relational ties to anyone at that funeral. And I've never been that way. I've always, I know that in my case, that if I were saying goodbye to a loved one, I would hope that the people who were there, I knew them, or someone in my family knew them. If I saw people that I didn't know and that I knew that whoever I had lost didn't know and none of my family knew, I'd be like, I would find that a little weird.
So for our area, we have a pretty good sized church. We have 600-700
Sure, yeah.
regular. Whenever our church members pass,
Mm-hmm.
do you typically go to their funeral?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I don't think I've missed many.
Okay.
Because, for the same reason, there is a relationship there, right? So,
well, I mean, you don't have a relationship with all 700-800 people that we have here,
and that's impossible, right? Right. I don't. Here's what's weird. I don't really have like a rule. I'm not even sure.
Okay.
I'm not even sure how I would make a rule. Like
right.
And if then statement. If these qualifiers are met, then I attend. I don't have anything like that. I base it. Oddly enough, I base it a lot on what my gut tells me.
Okay.
Which I tend not to rely a whole lot on my gut, because gut is kind of a weird thing to follow.
Yeah, I mean, ideally we want to be led by the Holy Spirit, which is much easier for charismatics and cessationists. I understand.
I would put whenever I say something like my gut tells me this, I am not lost on the fact that is probably the Holy Spirit who is.
Did your gut tell you things before you received the Holy Spirit? The answer is yes. You don't have to think about it. Of course it did. Of course it did. You had intuition before that.
If it did, I tended to ignore it.
Okay.
Much more often.
Okay, and that's a good response.
Yeah.
That's a good response. So that explains maybe to some of the listeners why, if your loved one passed away, if your child passed away, if Kurt didn't make it, well, now you know why. and because you weren't a member at our church, of course.
And the whole time we were talking, I was thinking, I hope this doesn't become some sort of qualifier for if I do not show up at a funeral. But I expected that it would end up there anyway.
I mean, I'm sure some people will take it that way. The same way you wear hats in church,
I do.
People are going to take it as blasphemy almost.
Or worse.
I mean, it's hard to be worse than blasphemy, isn't it?
I would argue that, yes.
I mean, come on.
Apparently hats are subjective.
So going back to the grief topic, grief doesn't have to be a result of losing a loved one. You could
Sure.
find grief in other areas, in other instances. Kurt, what time in your life were you the most grieved? Like when did you suffer grief the most?
I guess in order to accurately answer that, what do you mean by grief?
So grief,
Because my definition of grief might be different from yours.
Well, what's your definition, and I'll let you know if we're close or not.
I would say an emotional response to a loss
Okay.
might be a decent. That may or may not be what the dictionary says, but that's kind of my working definition.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much spot on. Grief is the deep emotional, mental, and sometimes physical response to loss, especially the loss of someone or something meaningful. So I think we're in alignment there. So with that definition in mind, when do you feel you suffered or you were experiencing grief the most?
I experience grief strange, so that may be difficult. I sometimes experience grief over things that most people would probably find shouldn't grieve someone. And then there's other things that I tend to not experience grief over that other people are then like, well, what's wrong with him? Why is he so non-emotional?
So
Or has he mastered the Vulcan, peace? And the answer to that's no. I can't fully explain why some things affect me on a deeper level than others, but in general, most things tend to. I'm very pragmatic, so deaths tend not to bother me too bad, especially if it were a believer. In fact, over time, just the opposite has begun to happen, especially if the person were really struggling. A sudden death is different because it's sudden.
right.
By definition, it's different. But someone who has maybe been less than in good health for an extended period of time, at some point that becomes a good thing, right? If you know your outcome, if
Right.
you know you're a believer and you know that when you take your last breath here, you wake up or are aware after that you're in the presence of God, then that sure would seem to beat the heck out of chronic pain or some sort of a debilitating illness.
Beat
Or
anything,
Right.
like that's the ultimate goal. Like maybe we didn't want to get there as quickly as we did,
Sure.
but that's still the end all be all. That's the goal. No matter what we do in life, if we miss that, we failed.
Right.
It doesn't matter how many people I lead to Christ. If I myself do not wind up in eternity beside him,
Sure.
I miss something.
Yeah, right.
I miss something. So, and the reason I ask is because I think for the most part I agree with you. Would you say, just from knowing you as long as I did, if I had to guess the instance where maybe you suffered the most grief, it wouldn't be in the loss of your big toe from the motorcycle accident?
Actually, that bothered me more than I expected it to.
Really?
Initially, it doesn't now. I mean, it's 3-4 years past now, so now it doesn't bother me at all. But yeah, for about the first year, it really bugged me.
Did it bug you because of the pain, or just because?
No, it bugged me mostly because I wasn't sure, having never lost a big toe, I wasn't sure how the downstream effects of that were going to be. Is it going to be the beginning of a series of issues?
Gotcha.
Just gait or strength or skeletal alignment, any number of things.
Right.
And yeah, that actually kind of bothered me for a little while.
No, that's surprising. I would have assumed it was you had a friend in Christ who left the faith. It would appear to me that's what I would assume was when you grieve the most.
That Well, that was actually a two-sided coin to that. Not only is there grief, but there's also lots of questioning. Like, have I sufficiently tried to bring them back? Have I not been as good a friend as I could? There's a lot of self-blame that comes into that when. And it depends. Here's the internal conflict is that I'm fully aware of the fact that the things that I experience emotionally are completely separate from the things that I know logically and factually. And so there is a tension between those two things. I tend to lean more towards the logical side. And I would assume this applies to all people, that there's this spectrum. There's always this duality. There's what you know versus what you feel, and I'm assuming everyone experiences that. But then the range is that some people lean more heavily into what they feel as opposed to what they think, and then there's other people who lean more heavily into what they think as opposed to what they feel, and I'm definitely on that side. That doesn't mean that I don't experience emotions, because I certainly do experience emotions. I tend to put them in the box that I think that they belong in instead of living in them or relishing them or whatever. I can't think of the right words to put there. But, there's some people who thrive on emotion.
Right.
And I'm definitely not that person.
Sure.
But, pragmatically speaking, someone drifting away, there's probably... It would almost seem arrogant to say that there was something I could have done to have prevented that.
So arrogant, but also potentially true at the same time, right?
Maybe. I don't know. How much power does any one person have on another person's faith?
I'll tell you how much power. One of my best friends in high school, super liberal, anti-gun, anti-everything. Several years ago, his house gets broken into. Guess who now has more guns than you and I combined? It's this guy. One person is all it took. He's like, oh, shoot, this is why I need this.
Sure.
So, and again, not putting blame on you, not you,
right.
Because, not throwing shade, but one person can make all the difference.
I can see where they could. But do you think that, for someone who has changed their mind in an extreme way, that you can talk them out of doing that? Because that's a different thing. Typically, once people, especially adults, have decided something, someone needs to break into their house for them to buy guns.
Yeah.
It takes something extreme.
It would take something extreme.
It's not just that, I sat down and had a talk with Corey and he convinced me I should buy a bunch of guns.
Yeah.
It's nothing like that.
Right.
They're going to have to be attacked. They're going to have to be broken into. Something extreme is going to happen for them to realize that I need to rethink this whole self-defense thing.
And there's even studies on that. For us, once we reach a certain age, for us to learn something new cognitively, we almost have to have a fear element for us to truly learn it, or at least to learn it quickly.
Sure.
So that makes sense. And the whole reason I brought this up is because I don't feel like I experience grief the way most people do in most situations. Part of that is most of my grandparents passed a long time ago.
Right.
So I love them, but I never had a great relationship with most of them.
Sure.
One of them I did, the others not so much. Obviously, when my parents go, that could be a different story.
Sure.
Last year, my wife and I, we actually had a miscarriage. And for that, I felt grief.
I would think so.
And that's like, and what's funny, I didn't even want children.
Right.
Like, even whenever she told me, like, I'm getting ready, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a change. And it happens. And oh my gosh, the wave of grief just hit me. And I'm thankful that both me and my wife, like, we might have questions, but I wasn't mad at God.
Right.
You know, I didn't blame him for that happening. I could question all day long. It's like, why allow that to happen? But it didn't shake my faith or rock my faith or anything like that, which I was thankful for.
Sure.
But going back to, I still don't know. I don't think I process grief. I'm not going to say not in a healthy way. I don't know if I process it normally. And that's kind of where a lot of this was coming from. And we have examples of grief in the Bible. We have Jesus when John the Baptist was beheaded.
Yes.
It said he went off.
Right.
And he mourned to an extent.
And when he saw Mary and Martha crying, he wept.
Oh,
that's obviously
for
Lazarus.
Talking about for Lazarus. I don't really know why he wept there. But he.
Well, I have an idea on that. Just from the wording, it would appear that the other, seeing twofold. One, seeing the pain, seeing the impact of death in the fallen world on the creation that he loves, seeing them hurt bothered him. I would argue it was less the fact that Lazarus was dead, because Lazarus wasn't going to stay dead.
Right.
But I think it was a good instruction on. And again, it's weird because it's not that he didn't know people die, so I don't want to make it sound like he came to a realization.
No.
But I think he experienced something there as a human in a real human way, and I think it grieved him greatly because he saw he experienced, not that he saw because he already knew, he experienced the result of the fall.
That's that, and I'm 100% with you. I think he is crying there, grieving there, because he knows this isn't how it's supposed to be.
Was never supposed to happen.
This was never the goal. This was never the intention.
Right.
But here we are.
Right.
But here we are. We have that. We have David as his son's dying. He's during the death. He's praying. He's fasting. He's doing all these things. And as soon as the son dies, he gets up and he goes and he has some food. He's like, "Hey, what more can I do? What more can I do? Surely I will see him again someday." So again, multiple instances of grief in the Bible. Even Job, which what happened with Job, I don't think happens today, happens with us. I don't know if it happened to anybody other than Job. So there are people on the charismatic side that will say, "Don't you know every time Satan wants to tempt you with something or do something, he has to go and get God's permission?" I don't believe that. Right. To me, that's crazy. But clearly something happened here. Job questioned, and he was grieving, but it was more over his own righteousness in a way, saying, "Hey, I did nothing wrong." So his grief was not only over the loss, but that this thing would happen to him when he did nothing wrong, even though he's missing the fact that we live in a fallen world. You know, to me, that's the amazing part about it. He keeps talking about his righteousness, everything that he's done right, that he hasn't done anything wrong, failing to understand, bro, you're in a fallen world. You know, ideally speaking, yes, you're right, but that's not the rules that we play by.
Right.
I say all that to say, bringing up all this grief, and it doesn't appear that grieving, asking God questions, being upset with God, asking him why, it doesn't appear that any of that is necessarily even a bad thing.
It's actually, I've always thought, and again, I want to preface by saying that grief is extremely subjective and extremely individual. And I would probably want to be the last person to criticize anyone for how they experience grief,
Sure.
because it is so intensely personal that how could anyone tell someone else how to grieve? And one thing that I noticed is one of the scriptures that I typically tend to think about when I think of grief is 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 and 14. And even this, in my mind, is a little vague, but I'll read it and see what you think. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. Now, see, that's saying don't grieve like those who don't have hope, but that's not telling you what that looks like.
And it's also not telling you to not grieve.
No, it's
just
yes.
saying it's saying grieve, but don't grieve like those who don't have hope.
Specifically, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. So it's a very specific subset. It's not saying don't grieve at all,
Right.
But it's also not telling us how those who have no hope grieve.
Right.
Or grieve. So it's even subjective. From that verse, it's still a little bit subjective. All we know is it's not to be like those who have no hope.
Right.
Which
hope would be hope in Christ.
Sure, in context there,
Sure,
certainly.
Sure. So in that stuff, because non-believers, they're going to be in the same boat with us. They're all going to grieve differently.
Sure.
So what does that mean? How do we apply that?
All I can really say is how I apply it, because again, I think that grief is so intensely individual. I'm not only would I feel weird telling people how they should grieve, but I would probably be wrong in telling people how they should grieve, other than pointing to Scripture that gives us guidelines, which is what I would consider 1 Thessalonians 4 to be a guideline. And my interpretation has always been that not like those who have no faith is my grief comes with the understanding that that's not the end at all. That it in many ways, and that this is going to sound weird, I'm not trying to mix theologies here or mix theology with mythology, but as far as a mythological, or even, I guess it could be real, I've never deep dove on it, but if you look at like how Vikings, and in all of their mythology and things that surround, I'm talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago, they appeared to live in such a way that they knew that they were going to see those people again. Now, of course, their ideas were weird. It was going to be Valhalla and hunting lands and all this kind of stuff, and fighting and all whatever. But the idea that you are 100% convinced when someone leaves this existence that you will see them in another existence is an extremely good one, and is obviously biblical. Again, I'm not trying to tie mythology, Norse mythology, into the Bible. I'm just saying the idea of being fully aware and fully confident that that's not the end, that there is something beyond that there is, that it's not you disappear and you cease to exist. It's not that you go away forever. It's that you move from one dimension or one existence, one plane of existence to another. So it's a transition as opposed to a leaving. Now, that doesn't mean you don't miss the person, because they are no longer in your plane of existence. So obviously there's going to be a loss on that level. But I think just the realization that it's just a transition. It's not actually leaving or disappearing.
Yeah. And even as incorrect the Vikings' view were, the fact that they did believe that they would see their comrades again in Valhalla, that's even came with the stipulation. That's those who died while fighting. You
Right.
know, there.
Right.
It's not that you could just sneak by
Sure.
and wind up in glory. There was something that you had to do to get there.
Right.
Kurt, let's end with this. The grief that you've experienced through your life, has that grief strengthened your relationship with Christ? Has it weakened it, or has it stayed about the same?
Probably slightly strengthened, but
Okay.
really about the same. I fairly quickly got a good grasp. Once I became a believer, I was fully convinced at what the Bible teaches. So I no longer was like, well, maybe some people go to heaven. Maybe there's something. Once I was convinced and became a believer, I knew from pretty much that point on that there is another existence, that this is a temporary place. This is what Paul calls it, a tent, or refers to it as a tent, that this is a temporary existence, and everyone will move from here to somewhere else.
Right.
That still leaves a huge open question as to people I know who pass who are not saved.
Do you still suffer grief for those people?
I do now, but I don't know in heaven how that works.
Oh, there's no way we will.
It's
in heaven.
completely speculative, but I would find it very hard to be happy and joyful in heaven if I knew that there were people I cared about who were not there.
Correct.
So I'm guessing there's going to be some mechanism to which I will not remember that, which sounds weird too. How do you not remember a close friend or a close relationship? But I don't know. I know that God will handle it in some way that is right, but I can only speculate on the how.
See, and I think I'm with you. During the, once going back to the miscarriage, that week where I was processing it, I felt like I prayed more, and I was more open and vulnerable to God. But afterward, I don't know. I think I'm kind of with you. It maybe slightly strengthened,
Right.
But for the most part, it stayed the same. So, and I guess that leaves me with the question is why, when some people are dealing with grief, why does that put a wedge between them and God? Why is their relationship lessened because of that?
Probably comes down to blame, if I were just guessing.
That's fair.
I've always had I think a rather healthy understanding that no one lives forever in this time, and everyone and everything dies. So I've never felt the need to blame anyone that someone or something was no longer here. Even when I was a little kid and I would lose animals or whatever, I never blamed the person that ran over my dog. You know what I mean? I've never been we need to find out who's responsible for this kind of person. I've always been more of that happened and that was awful. I wish that hadn't happened.
Right.
But what's the point of looking for blame?
Sure.
Because ultimately you're gonna have to pin it on God, right? You can only blame so many people when
By
someone
saying he allowed it, or
right.
Kurt, we definitely didn't get into as much scripture today as we normally do, but we did certainly squirt all around it. John 11:35. That's when he wept openly, talking about Lazarus. Psalms is filled with emotion. And quick aside, and we'll probably need to do a lesson on this or a pod. Do you read Psalms?
Not very often.
Do you get anything out of Psalms?
Not very often.
I'm with you, man. It's rough. It's rough.
But there's some people who love it. I know people who are like, I love.
We need to bring in a
read.
person that loves Psalms and then we can have a back and forth, because as I go through my Bible reading, I'm just like, this has to be done. Like it's so much of the same thing, and it's not that it's bad.
No, of course not.
But I genuinely get nothing out of it.
Right.
Oh, it's rough.
It's very emotional.
It is. 1 Peter 5:7, talking about casting your cares upon him because he cares for you. Galatians 6:2 talks about bearing one another's burdens. You brought up the 1 Thessalonians verse 4:13. Do not grieve as those who have no hope. Then going back to Psalms, Psalm 34, it talks about the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. Kurt, what did you learn today about grief?
I don't know if it wasn't something. I guess I learned that you and I grieve similarly, which I wasn't aware of previously. But I'm not sure I learned that I grieve different from most people, because I've kind of always known that. I've seen enough other people grieve to understand that that's not how I experience it. Not that I don't experience that even same intensity of pain.
Right.
It just doesn't come out that way.
See, and I always assume that my lack of grieving in most areas came from just experiencing a lot of loss pretty early in life. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, my grandma on my mother's side, she died when I was maybe 2 or 3. My grandma that I was the closest to, she died while I was still in high school. You know, and a bunch of deaths between then and now. And it's not that I'm numb to it by any means, but I do believe that they were believers, and I believe that I'll see them again. And I don't know. So sometimes I feel bad for the lack of emotion that I may be showing, where other people are crying and sobbing, and I'm just there.
I used to, but as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that why am I sorry for how I am?
Yeah.
Why does the clay blame the potter for
Sure.
how it was made?
Yeah.
So I've kind of come to the conclusion that that's how I'm built. And that doesn't mean that I can't still be helpful to someone who is grieving. I would be more helpful to someone who grieves in the way I do than someone who grieves differently.
Right. Well, Kurt, that's another episode in the books. I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation, this little back and forth. Hopefully, this will be somewhat encouraging, possibly a blessing to somebody out there if they hear it, and maybe you guys grieve like we do. Maybe you cry and sob like my wife, like your wife.
Yes.
It takes a village, as they say. Guys, as always, you are listening to the Holy Rewind. We'll catch you next time.